Okay, good morning everyone. It's a beautiful morning this morning outside. It's quite balmy this morning even though it's winter. So we're very blessed, and we've had some rain here which has been very advantageous. So this morning we want to continue from Daniel chapter 2, and we're reading we will be referring or reading from this booklet on Daniel 2. And the full title of the booklet is The Prophecy of Daniel 2 Reviewed in the Light of the Second Coming of Jesus to Set Up His Kingdom. So this is a review of the common understanding of Daniel 2. And we have added some more accurate aspects to this prophecy. And we spoke yesterday, last week, about the two legs. And most people believe differently to us on this, but we believe that the first leg is pagan Rome and the second leg is papal Rome, which brings us right down to 1798. And this has a lot of information in this book to prove that this is true. We're not going to go into all that this morning. We want to go to the feet, which are part of iron and part of clay. These are the times in which we're living today, at the end time. So if you have the book, and you can get this book from us, or from Behold Your God Ministry, or you can, we're going to put it on the website soon. So we can put the book on the website and you can download it from there. That might be 2 or 3 weeks in coming. We go to page 21. And we'll maybe go to page 20 and just read verse 43 again of Daniel 2. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So this introduces us to the thought of what is the iron, what does the iron represent, and what does the clay represent. And the iron legs represent the dominance of the Roman Empire in the Fourth Kingdom. So the legs represented that, and that was iron, an iron monarchy, basically, of Rome, with its Caesars first. And then in 538, the Emperor Justinian made a legal document which gave power to the papacy in the eastern part of his empire. And so we have that happening too. And when he did that, he really transferred the power from himself, more or less, in that part of the world to the papacy, and that power grew. And then there was this joining of the religious power with the state power. And during those 1260 years in which these, particularly the papal leg, was operating, there was a lot of persecution, and some people say that there was 30 million, some people say up to 150 million people were destroyed during that time by religious persecution. And there's other various estimates all the way in between. But when state powers, I'll just put this on the board, when state powers, or we can say national powers, when they amalgamate, when they join with religious powers, there's only one result really that ever comes out of that, and that equals persecution of minorities. And that is because the state power has the national powers or state powers have the right to make laws which are supposed to be for the good of the people. That's why they're there. So we have traffic laws so people don't crash into each other and things like that. But then religious powers, they operate according to religious laws. And depending which religion you're in, will depend whether, when these two join, whether that will be apparently favourable to you or not. But when the two come together, religious laws and the national laws, the national powers and the religious powers, when they come together, we always have this persecution of minorities. And a lot of this is happening in the world already. It's already there in many, many countries. And so Jesus, when he came to this earth, he alerted us to this problem. And so those who followed Jesus, those who were persecuted in in Europe, and went to America to found new colonies, those went because of religious persecution in Europe, the initial settlers in America. And fortunately, the Constitution of America, which eventually came out of that, was freedom of religion, based on what Jesus said here, which we're going to read in a minute. But initially, some of those who fled to America because of persecution then turned around and persecuted other people in America. But fortunately, there were men like Roger Williams and Thomas Jefferson and some others. I'm not so familiar with American history, but the men like George Washington and others, they fought for religious liberty. So the feat of iron and clay is a time when there is a controversy again which comes to light over this, because state powers and religious powers are coming together in the world more and more now, and we're beginning to see persecution of minorities. And those of us who believe in religious liberty, it's time for us to speak and to alert those who are coming together in these ways that Jesus made a definite distinction between the state powers and the religious powers. So we want to read from Mark chapter 12, verse 13. And we'll go to verse 17. It's found on page 21 of this book. And they sent unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true, and carest for no man. For you regard not the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. So they made a true statement there. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? So should we respect the state and the state laws, and how much should we respect them? Shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, Why tempt you me? Bring me a penny that I may see it. Because their idea was to trick Jesus. If he said we should support Caesar, then they would say, because Jesus was a Jew, they'd say he's not loyal to the Jewish nation. He's not a true teacher. But if he said not to support Caesar, then they would say to Caesar, to the Romans, they'd say he's trying to set up his own kingdom. And so Jesus made a third alternative. The men who came to him thought there was only two alternative answers to this question. But Jesus showed that there's a third alternative. And often there is a third alternative in life, one that we don't see plainly. And certainly they didn't see that there was another alternative available to them. And so we read on. And they brought it, that's the penny, and he said unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? So every coin has a high-ranking person on it, and normally it was the Caesar or the king or so forth and so on, or the president. And they said unto him, Caesar's. And Jesus answering said unto them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. And they marvelled at him, because he saw the third alternative. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about this third alternative. Now, religious powers shouldn't try to influence state powers by putting pressure on them, because Jesus said we should keep these two things separate. So Jesus said to separate, to keep separate religion and national powers. Now, the reason is that it always leads to persecution when these two amalgamate. And this is what happened in the Roman Catholic Church. It had the power over the state powers of its time, and the religious teaching of the Roman Catholic Church became the laws of the state. So if you disagreed with the interpretation that the Pope gave of a religious duty, then the state power would burn you to death or torture you or something like that. Certainly it was a very terrible time. Now, this is happening in the world today. We have powers of nations which isolate certain communities, and then they persecute those communities. So if I wanted to live in some Islamic countries, for instance, or if I was a local Muslim and I wanted to become a Christian, then I could be put to death in those countries, and highly likely I would be. Or if I was a Muslim in some communist countries, I could be re-educated or persecuted. And so these ways are happening in our world. And the same is true in some, or just about every religion of the world. It's only where Christ has taught this and they've taken it up that we still have a comparatively good religious freedom, but this is prophesied in the Bible that this will come to an end during the time of the feet and the toes. So I would like now to look at, just briefly, a short quote from a writer called Ellen White. And this is found, for those who have the books or want to look it up, it's found in the Fourth Bible Commentary, page 1168, paragraph 8. And here she reads, and I think this is a good summary of the problem that arises during the feet. The mingling of church craft and statecraft is represented by the iron and the clay. The mingling of church craft and statecraft. So church craft and statecraft. Now, what is this mingling and how does it come about? Well, national powers, in a democracy for instance, they want to gain votes, don't they? They want to get people to vote for them. And religious leaders know this, and so they often sort of negotiate across and say, we will encourage our people to vote for you if you stop doing certain things and create new laws which would suit us better. So sort of deals can go across, and that is, you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. And I can get my church, my religious organisation, I can preach from a sermon on it, that we should vote for these conservative powers, or for this power, or for that power. as long as you bear in mind that we want this legislation passed. So we don't see this going on much, but we know that it happens. And that religious powers have their agendas. They have their things they want done. And often, in some countries in particular, what they want done is against other minority groups in that country. So we find that this happens. And then state powers, if it's a democracy, they want these religions to support them. And so we have, like in India, for instance, we have the Hindu nationalist parties, which are basically Hindu parties which run the government. And in China we have the Communist Party, and to go against in your religious beliefs that party would mean that you could be in serious trouble. So we know that this happens and is happening in our world today. Okay, so we have church craft and statecraft. And this is religion and state powers. And at the end of time, they seek to mingle with each other. But they're not fully able to unite with each other. So, in the feet, here we have the feet, and we have 10 toes in this feet. And normally there's 10 toes in a foot. Now with the 10 toes, it's interesting that there are in the Encyclopedia Britannica, there's listed 10 main religions of the world. And these religions work reasonably independently of each other. But these religious powers are coming together at this time in the world. We notice that this is happening and will continue to happen. And they are coming more and more into harmony with each other. And so this can lead to all sorts of things. I'd like now to go to Revelation 17. And we'll go to verse 12. It's page 26 in the booklet. And here it talks about 10 horns. And this has to do with the end of time too. We'll read from verse 12. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings, one out with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. They shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So the 10 kings are religious powers because they have received no kingdom as yet. Now, many people think that these 10 kings are the divided nations of Europe, the ones in Daniel 2 and probably the ones here as well, but this is not true, because the divided nations of Europe, they already are kingdoms, but the only powers which are not kingdoms, which have great power in the world, are the religious powers. Now, religious powers cross boundaries, national boundaries. For instance, if you live in Iraq, and in Iraq there's 2 types of Islam there, plus there's Christian groups too, but 2 types of Islam. And those 2 types of Islam don't get on all that well. Some of the Islamic people are more in harmony with the Iranians than with their own government, because that is their religious brotherhood, I would say. They're closer in religious affiliation to people in Iran. And so religion's loyalty to a country can cross barriers into other countries because of affinity with another country's religion or people, or lack of affinity. So this is the way it works. Okay, we'll read on from verse 14. Maybe I... Pardon?
26.
Yeah, it's not on 26, I don't think, is it? Anyway, I can get it from the Bible. In the Bible, one place can explain another place when we make the connection between the 2 places. Okay, so we'll start in verse 12 again. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So these religious powers will support the beast power as it forms right at the end of time. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb. So this is an attack on Christ and his people on the earth, and on the principles of Jesus. His kindness, his love, his care will be attacked. And the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And these people who are called and chosen and faithful are called the 144,000. And they are faithful to Jesus in the last times. Verse 15, and he saith unto them, and he saith unto me, the waters which you saw where the whore sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdoms unto the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So we have an amalgamation of powers here that support the beast. And these 10 toes, just might take this away now. These 10 toes, they support the beast. But then when they see that they've been deceived, they will eventually attack the beast. And we come to realise that these are the times of the 10 toes in which we are living. So I'd like now, have we got very long or? Okay. I'd like now to see that Daniel, who is the prophet who saw these things, he was tested as a young man, and the tests had to do with freedom of choice that Daniel encountered. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 1. And we want to see that smaller tests come to us. And if we pass these smaller tests, we will be more ready for the bigger tests which come later. But if we fail on the small tests, when the big tests come, we will not be ready, we will not be able to be strong enough to pass those tests. So we'll go to Daniel chapter 1, and King Nebuchadnezzar took certain Hebrew children to Babylon with him after he conquered Judea. And one of them was Daniel and his friends. And these people were to be assimilated into the Babylonian Empire and take part in Babylon. So he was doing them a favour in a sense by not putting them to death or anything, but he was going to use them to build up his own Babylonian kingdom. So verse 4, we'll go to verse 3. And the king spoke unto the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favoured, and skillful in all wisdom and cunning, in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. And among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, and then the other 3. And verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So Daniel decided not to partake of the king's food and drink. And there was two reasons for that. And the first reason was that that food was offered to idols. And for Daniel to be faithful to his God, to render to God the things that are God's, Daniel could not eat the food offered to idols. So Daniel determined in his heart not to eat those foods offered to the idols. The second reason was health reasons. Daniel's mind was very clear and very powerful. He was one of the top minds in Judea. That's why he was chosen. He was young. He was successful. And so he was chosen to go to Babylon for that reason. So the second thing was for health reasons. And both these things have to do with who is in power. Who is in power of Daniel? Is it King Nebuchadnezzar or is it God? So Daniel was prepared to cooperate with King Nebuchadnezzar to help him in his kingdom while he was there. But Daniel made 2 points where he would not submit to the authority of King Nebuchadnezzar. And these 2 areas have to do with his relationship to God. His relationship to God. So Daniel put God first as to not worshipping an idol. He put God first so he wouldn't worship the idol. The second area was the health, because he knew he was in a kingdom which wanted to re-educate him back into, or not back, but into a Babylonian. King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make a Babylonian out of Daniel and his friends and use them in his world-conquering dominion. But Daniel knew that his health and clear thinking was essential, because he had clear thinking because of what he ate and drank. Daniel ate a vegetarian diet, and we can read it here in this chapter. He was given pulse to eat when he refused to eat the king's food, but he did it in a nice way. God worked for him. He didn't just come out and say, I'm not going to eat the king's food. That's it. No, he negotiated a trial run to show that he was healthier, smarter, stronger, fuller and fatter when he ate a vegetarian diet. So he was led by God in that way. God doesn't want us to be just rebels. He wants us to present the correct way and our reasons to those who are in power over us. So we need to remember that when we come into conflict with state powers or religious powers. Yes, so these are the two reasons. He put God first, and he knew that to put God first he needed a healthy body. And that's why Jesus didn't drink the vinegar that was offered to him on the cross, because he was the saviour of the world and he wanted to have a clear mind while he was on the cross suffering for our sins. So I'll let you read the story yourselves, but let us see what the result was of this trial. Daniel had 10 days to eat his vegetarian diet, and the rest, apart from his three friends, they started eating and drinking according to what the king had provided. And at the end of the trial, it was seen that Daniel was, in verse 15, and at the end of 10 days their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. And of course that was eating pig and animal lard and dainties from the table and fatty foods and all that sort of bad for your health type foods. And so some people say, oh, it doesn't matter what you eat, but certainly if you eat plenty of vegetables and fresh fruit and pulses and grains, as Daniel did, your skin will be clearer, you will be healthier and stronger than if you had eaten those disease-causing foods that the Babylonians were eating. So his countenances were fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Then Melzar took away the portion of their meat and wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. So what is pulse? It's legumes, but I think in here it's a broader term, because this is the Old English version, and it's basically a vegetarian diet that would be good for them. Okay, and as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like unto Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus. So the results of Daniel's life were such that he became the prime minister of the Babylonian kingdom. He was well respected there by the king. He was hated sometimes by the wise men there who were jealous of him, but he was respected by the king. And he received these dreams and visions, these prophecies during that time as the Prime Minister. Now we just want to make one point before we close, and it's this, that the small questions that we face, whether we're going to be loyal to God or loyal to loyal to the state sometimes, or where the state is wrong, is interfering in religious things. When we come to these trials, we want to make the point that that the small decisions that we make that don't seem to matter too much are an indication of what we will decide when it becomes more important. So Daniel said he didn't want to eat the king's meat because it was offered to idols, and he knew it was unhealthy for his mind and body. And he lived to an old age. And so you'll find that later on, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image based on what he saw when he dreamed this dream. And Daniel gave the interpretation of this image. And those who ate of the king's meat were not thrown into the burning fiery furnace because they had gone along with Babylon over this first clash, the first clash of principle. They had eaten the king's meat and drunk the king's wine. And so when it came to King Nebuchadnezzar making this huge image, all of gold, he made it gold. You'll find this in chapter 3. From the head right to the feet. He was saying, my kingdom is going to last forever. That's what he was saying. And that this interpretation, that my kingdom will pass away, is not true. And so he said, everyone in my kingdom must worship this golden image, or else their houses will be cut in dunghill, and they will be thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And the only ones that are recorded in the scriptures that didn't bow to the image, the golden image, were the three worthies, Daniel's three friends. And we would presume that Daniel was somewhere else in the kingdom at the time. He wasn't there for some reason. He wouldn't have bowed either. But God stood beside them, and they were unaffected by the flames. And so they were faithful in that which was little, and they were faithful in that which is much. If we're unfaithful in that which is little, the small temptations, then we will find ourselves unfaithful even more when the big temptations come. We won't even see them as temptations in a lot of cases. So just to finish this off now, so there was a stone cut out of a mountain without hands that strikes the image on the feet. And this is the second coming of Jesus Christ in glory. Jesus said, I will come again and receive you unto myself. Those who follow Jesus will be rescued from the turmoil and the turbulence of this time of the 10 toes, when religious freedom is taken away from God's people. This is a prediction of what is going to happen, and it's an accurate prediction, but God doesn't make it happen that way. God foresees what will happen, because when church and state come together, there's always persecution. And Jesus will rescue his people from religious persecution at the end of time, at the very end of time. And that is why we should be learning to be faithful now. And we should guard the avenues of our bodies from detrimental substances and foods. And medicines too, detrimental medicines. We should only use the good medicines, or in a real emergency where we just don't know what to do, we can use the conventional medicines. But generally speaking, we should be moving in the direction of using the natural remedies that God has given to us for these last days. But we don't want to be fanatics, so we should be careful to move in the counsels of God daily. Okay, so we'll stop there.